There are places within the imperial palace where no light of the astronomicon dares to reach, halls so vast that sound dies before it can return. Marble veins carry whispers of a world that once remembered laughter, now replaced by the silence of eternal vigilance. There, in the shadow of the golden throne, figures of living gold stand motionless, custodians of the emperor himself. To most of mankind, they are myths sculpted into flesh, angels of the master of mankind, protectors of a god whose body has not moved for 10,000 years. But even among the faithful, few truly understand their purpose. Because the Custodes were never mere guards. They were never simply warriors. They were and are the watchers of truth itself. And truth, in the Imperium, is far more dangerous than any Xenos or daemon. They move through the palace like statues that dream, every motion deliberate, every glance weighted with centuries of knowing. They have seen what even the Inquisition dares not name. They have walked in the vaults where the Emperor's still heart is said to echo like thunder through the metal bones of Terra. They have guarded the golden throne, yes, but they have also guarded something else, something the Imperium itself must never fully see. For in the quiet hours, when the Astronomicon's light flickers like a dying flame and the chorus of 10,000 psychers strains against the immensity of the void, there are moments, brief, unbearable moments, when the Custodes kneel not in worship, but in mourning. If you walk with us into these shadowed halls, if you dare to see what lies behind the gold, then stay. Like this tale, share it with your brothers in faith, and subscribe to the memory of those who still stand sentinel beside their silent God. For tonight, we descend into the secret purpose of the Custodes. The air inside the imperial palace does not move as it does in any other place in the galaxy. It is filtered through cyclopean engines, sanctified by incense, and carried on the whisper of prayers that have never ended. To breathe within those walls is to inhale the memory of the Imperium itself, dust from banners that once waved above ancient Terra, ashes from the pyres of traitors long since forgotten, and the faint metallic scent of promethium lingering like unspoken judgment. Beneath the endless glow of luminorbs, the marble floors gleam with such polish that even the reflection of a custodian seems hesitant to meet its own gaze. They stand like monuments, motionless yet awake, the gold of their armor alive with the light of 1,000 candles. Every surface bears the mark of devotion, the aquila across the breastplate, the engraved litanies along their blades, and the faint hum of energy fields that coil invisibly around them like restrained storms. No two are identical. Each bears subtle differences in craft, artistry, and the invisible soul that lies beneath the ceramite. Each is a single note in the Emperor's eternal hymn, a symphony that has not changed in 10,000 years. When they move, it is like the turning of a planet. No hesitation, no excess. A soundless grace that comes from lives spent in perfect control. Their steps echo with the weight of destiny, and even servitors pause in their mechanical routines when a custodian passes. There is reverence in every glance cast their way, but also fear. The fear of perfection so absolute it erases the space for doubt or mercy. The Custodes are not brothers as the Astartes are. They are singularities, each forged alone, their loyalty directed not toward each other, but toward the one they guard, the Emperor, the master of mankind, the unmoving God. And yet, for all their divine poise, there are moments when even gold trembles.
Within the inner sanctums of the palace, beyond the reach of mortal eyes, the Custodes patrol through vaults so ancient that their walls hum with trapped time. Here, relics of forgotten wars are sealed behind sigil-locked doors. Data slates filled with forbidden scripture line shells that have not been touched since the days of unification. In the deeper chambers, beneath kilometers of adamantine and marble, the sound of the Golden Throne's machinery murmurs through the bones of the palace. A rhythmic pulse, steady and omnipotent, like the heartbeat of a dying god refusing to fade. It is said that those who serve closest to the throne never sleep, not because they cannot, but because dreams are a luxury reserved for men. They are statues in meditation, watching the light flicker across the throne room's ceiling where the banners of a dead age hang suspended in stillness. The faces beneath the helms are ageless. They do not age because the burden of time does not dare touch them, but the soul, that even gold cannot preserve. One among them, a custodian named Valerian, stands watch upon the 9th tier of the Sanctum Imperialis. His armor is immaculate, every curve reflecting the silent glow of 1,000 votive candles. The scent of incense curls around his pauldrons, tracing invisible runes in the air. His spear, the guardian spear of 1,000 battles, rests against the floor, its power field dormant but hungry. Valerian's eyes, gray as the storm-swept void above Terra, are fixed on the distant doors that lead to the Hall of Echoes. He has stood here for 72 standard years without rest, his duty uninterrupted, his thoughts unspoken. But thoughts, no matter how tightly caged, find their way through the cracks of discipline. He remembers, though he should not, the last time the Emperor spoke. Not to him, never to him, but to all custodians through the Vox Litany during the early days of the Great Scouring. He remembers the sound, not like a voice, but like the gravity of a sun pressing against his soul. Since that day, there has been nothing but silence. Yet the silence, he has come to realize, is not empty. It hums, it vibrates, it watches. Sometimes when the palace trembles under the weight of its own sanctity, he imagines he hears the whisper of a sigh. It could be the wind drawn through the throne's vents, or the echo of machinery devouring another 100 psychers to keep the Astronomicon alive. But it feels aware. There are moments when Valerian wonders whether they are guarding a god or something else. He crushes the thought before it can form, reciting the catechism of eternal duty beneath his breath. But faith, like armor, can crack if worn too long. Through the quiet corridors a chime resounds, low, resonant, ancient. The shift of the watch. Custodes exchange positions in a rhythm older than any living man. No orders are spoken, no signals exchanged. Each knows his place in the great pattern, as stars know their orbit. The Emperor requires no command. His will is the pattern itself. Yet even in such perfection, something stirs. A vox chime flickers briefly within Valerian's helm. A single word, spoken in high Gothic, transmitted through encrypted channels meant only for the 10,000. Deviation. No context, no coordinates, just the signal. The word alone carries gravity. Deviation means something has changed, something unaccounted for in the infinite machinery of the throne. Valerian moves. The motion is slow, reverent, and absolute. His footsteps ring against the marble carved from the bones of pre-imperial kings. Each step takes him deeper, through layers of architecture built atop the ruins of humanity's forgotten ages. The walls here bear murals depicting the emperor not as a god, but as a man, tall, weary, and aflame with purpose. Few living beings have seen these murals. Fewer still could admit it. He meets another custodian at the intersection of two massive halls, a Castian, whose armor is engraved with scenes from the war in heaven. They exchange no greetings, only a single, shared glance of understanding. Two golden titans moving through silence. The word deviation lingers between them like incense smoke, heavy with meaning. Together, they approach the chamber of radiant stillness, a sanctum sealed since before the heresy. The sigils upon its gates pulse faintly, reacting to their proximity. Valerian extends his gauntleted hand and presses it against the activation rune. The gate opens with the sound of 1,000 years exhaling. The air that escapes smells of ozone and age. Inside, the chamber is vast and dark, lined with reliquaries containing fragments of the emperor's earliest works, prototypes of the gene seed, preserved organs of failed creations, and strange crystalline structures that hum with psychic residue. At the center, suspended by grav fields, floats a single object, a helm, gilded and cracked, still faintly glowing. The mark upon its brow is unmistakable, the sigil of the Emperor himself. Valerian kneels. The light from his armor reflects upon the golden mask, making it seem almost alive. He feels a tremor in his thoughts, a pulse that aligns with the faint rhythm of the throne far above. A Castian's voice breaks the silence, low and deliberate. It stirs again. Valerian says nothing. He watches as the faint light within the mask flickers, once, twice, like the slow blink of something ancient remembering how to see. The air grows heavier. The walls hum in sympathetic vibration. Deep beneath the throne, the endless engines roar a little louder as though in response. And in that moment, Valerian realizes something he cannot speak aloud. Whatever they are guarding, it is not entirely asleep. The hum subsides, the light fades. Silence returns, swallowing all sound but the slow rhythm of the Custodes' breathing. They remain kneeling for 7 minutes, one for each Primarch still loyal at the end of the heresy, then rise as one. Neither speaks again. The meaning of what they witnessed will be recorded only in thought, sealed in mental vaults accessible to none but the Captain General himself. When Valerian returns to his post, the marble corridor feels different. The light seems sharper, the silence deeper. Far beyond the walls of Terra, he knows the Imperium continues its endless wars, blind to the slow pulse beneath its heart. The Emperor's light still shines, but its source trembles. He lifts his spear and stands again in perfect stillness. Yet behind the faceless mask, something human stirs. A memory, a question, a fear. What if the purpose of the Custodes was never to protect the Emperor from the galaxy, but to protect the galaxy from him? The thought is blasphemy. It should be annihilated before it takes root. And yet, in the deep silence, it remains, like a spark trapped beneath gold. The candles flicker once more. Somewhere, deep below, the throne hums again. Deviation, the word repeats within his mind, though no vox carries it this time.
Valerian does not move. He watches the horizon of marble and gold and wonders, if the Emperor ever awoke, would even the 10,000 be enough to hold him back? The thought burns like a prayer unspoken. The shift continued in absolute stillness, a ritual of silence that no mortal tongue could ever replicate. Action resonated in harmony with purpose. Across the miles of the palace's interior, from the vaults of Rhython to the Celestial Bridge, the 10,000 performed their eternal dance, each motion echoing the Emperor's last unspoken command. Valerian remained at his post, yet his mind trembled beneath the weight of what he had seen. The image of the gilded helm lingered behind his eyes, that faint, impossible flicker of light. He had felt something in that moment. Not vision, not sound, but a presence brushing the edges of his mind, ancient and sorrowful, like a voice too vast to understand. It had lasted only an instant, yet it carried the gravity of centuries. The catechisms taught that to feel was weakness, that thought itself was duty made manifest, and yet, for the first time in centuries, Valerian did not recite the words. He stood and listened to the silence, and in it heard the faintest sound, a sigh that was not wind. Beyond the Sanctum Imperialis, storms rolled endlessly across Terra's poisoned skies. From the high balconies, the Custodes could see them gathering, clouds lit from below by the glow of billions of hive fires, lightning arcing across the ruins of ancient continents. The air outside the palace was unbreathable, the land unlivable, yet still, humanity worshipped below. Pilgrims crawled by the millions to the palace walls, their bodies blistered by the winds of ash, their prayers rising like smoke. To them, the Custodes were holy guardians, untouchable and pure. But within the palace, among the 10,000, there were no illusions of holiness, only duty, sharpened into eternity. Valerian turned his gaze inward to the marble statues that lined the grand processional. Each one was a custodian from the earliest days, heroes of the Unification Wars, immortalized in gold. He had walked past them countless times without thought, yet now he saw them differently. Their faces, carved with impossible precision, all bore the same expression, not triumph, not peace, but sorrow. The kind of sorrow that belongs to beings who understand that perfection is not salvation, it is exile. His thoughts were interrupted by the low resonance of the vox once more. This time, the word carried tone, measured, deliberate, the voice of Tribune Orestes himself, commander of the shield companies assigned to the sanctum. Deviation verified. Maintain observation. Do not approach. The line cut. The command was absolute. Valerian bowed his head slightly, the movement almost imperceptible beneath the weight of his armor. The Custodes did not question, they obeyed. Yet beneath the obedience, something began to shift. A quiet unease rippling through the psychic stillness that bound the 10,000 together. They were not linked by mind or soul, but by the weight of shared purpose, and now that purpose felt uncertain. He found himself drawn to the lower levels, where the air grew colder and the light dimmed to a faint, perpetual dusk. Here, beneath the palace's shining floors, the Imperium's machinery sprawled like veins through the body of a sleeping god. Titan-sized generators hummed in unison, feeding power to the throne, while rivers of data streamed across obsidian conduits. Skitarii patrols moved in strict formation, their red robes fluttering like banners of blood, their augmetic limbs hissing with sacred steam. Valerian's arrival silenced them. Even the Mechanicus bowed when the Custodes walked among them. Their Benharic chatter faded to reverent murmurs, their photolenses lowering in programmed humility. None dared meet the blank gaze of the Auramite Hilm. He passed through them without acknowledgement. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Custodes were both miracle and threat, a living paradox, beyond machine logic and human frailty. They revered the throne as a god engine, yet only the Custodes truly stood near its heart. And that heart, Valerian knew, was beating unevenly. He paused at the edge of a massive viewing platform. Below him stretched the Throne Mechanicum's substructure, a labyrinth of golden conduits, sealed vaults, and crystalline pylons pulsing with psitic light. The glow was faint, like dying embers buried beneath glass. He had stood here before, many centuries ago, when the light had burned bright enough to sear the eyes. Now it was dim, beautiful still, but fading. A voice echoed behind him, calm and resonant. "You feel it too." Valerian turned slowly. A Costian stood at the entrance to the platform, his armor darker than most, engraved with runes of warding and remembrance. He walked forward, his steps heavy with intent. "The pulse weakens," a Costian said. "Every century, a fraction slower. The Mechanicus do not speak of it, but their machines record it all." Valerian's voice was low, carried by the weight of ritual. "The Emperor endures. The throne sustains." A Costian looked at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable behind the helm. "Do you truly believe that?" The silence stretched. Somewhere in the depths below, a servitor wailed, a sound like metal grieving. Valerian's fingers tightened slightly around the haft of his spear. "Belief," he said, "is irrelevant. Duty is all." A Costian nodded, the faintest tilt of the head. "Yes, but what if duty itself changes?" The question lingered between them.
heretical even in its quiet form. Neither would report it, neither would repeat it, yet it hung in the air, undeniable, because both of them knew what they had seen. The flicker in the helm, the tremor in the light, the pulse of something vast stirring beneath the surface. Valerian looked down again at the machinery beneath the throne. "Then we will adapt," he said finally, "as we were made to."
Acastian turned to leave. "And if what we guard no longer needs guarding?" Valerian did not answer. When Acastian's footsteps faded into the hum of the machinery, Valerian stood alone once more. He reached out, resting his hand lightly against the railing. The metal was cold, colder than it should have been. Beneath his gauntlet, he could feel it, the faintest vibration, rhythmic but uneven, like a breath caught between heartbeats. He closed his eyes, and for the briefest instant, the hum became a voice. Not words, not sound, but intent, a pressure against the walls of his mind, vast and ancient, filled with light and agony. It was not the Emperor as man nor God. It was something else, something that existed between those absolutes. The sensation passed as quickly as it came, leaving Valerian shaken. He opened his eyes, and the silence returned, unbroken, eternal. He withdrew his hand. Above him, the endless halls of the palace stretched into shadow, the banners of long-dead legions fluttering faintly in artificial wind. The gold light bathed everything in false warmth, hiding the truth beneath its shine. Valerian straightened his spear and turned toward the ascending corridors. His footsteps echoed through the marble vastness, measured, calm, perfect once again. But deep within the layers of the throne, far below where even Custodes dared not tread, something immense and ancient stirred. Not awakening, but remembering. And the 10,000, in all their perfection, could do nothing but wait. 3 nights passed, if one could measure nights in a place where light never faded. The palace knew no true dawn, no dusk, only the steady luminance of holiness unbroken by time. Yet to Valerian, something had changed. The light now felt colder, sharper, as though the palace itself had become aware of its own watching. Even the air had weight, a density that clung to the skin beneath his armor, thick with ozone and the scent of oil. The palace was alive. He had always known that. Its corridors breathed, its walls sang faint hymns of machine prayer through concealed vox channels. The adepts of the Mechanicus claimed it was merely the hum of the palace's reactors, one of the countless engines that sustained the throne. But to those who listened closely, who had stood long enough to feel its rhythm in their bones, the sound seemed to respond. A whisper here, a tone shift there, as if the palace itself remembered. It was during the 4th watch cycle that the stillness broke. A shriek, raw, metallic, too jagged to belong to human throat, pierced through the hallowed air. It came from the lower ascension shafts, deep beneath the Sanctum Imperialis. Valerian was already moving before his mind could register the impulse. His spear flared to life, its edge humming with a contained storm of power.
The descent was swift. His armor adjusted pressure as he passed through the layers of sanctified atmosphere. The shaft walls blurred past, carved with bas-reliefs of the Emperor's triumphs, his forging of unity, his conquest of old earth, his silent enthronement. Each carving glowed faintly in recognition of Valerian's gene signature. The palace knew its guardians, and yet, this time, the statue's eyes seemed to follow him a fraction longer than before. He reached the base of the shaft to find 3 Skitarii corpses sprawled across the obsidian floor, their augmetics still twitching, sparks arcing from ruptured skull plates. Their weapons lay untouched, no wounds from combat, no signs of struggle. They had simply stopped, one by one, like machines suddenly denied their purpose. A single servitor hovered nearby, its vox grill sputtering static. Its islands rotated wildly, unable to focus. Valerian's voice cut through the hum like a blade.
report. The servitor froze. Then, in a stutter of fractured binaric, it managed one word: awakening. The sound died, replaced by the deep thrum of the palace machinery reconfiguring. Power conduits along the walls began to glow faintly red, like veins pulsing beneath translucent skin. The marble underfoot vibrated as if something immense had shifted below. Valerian raised his spear, scanning the corridors. Nothing moved, yet the air itself felt charged, thick with potential. He advanced slowly, each step measured, precise, the perfect dance of a warrior who had never known hesitation. His armor's sensors detected fluctuations in the surrounding energy field, small irregular surges spreading outward from the throne's lower substructure. A containment breach? Impossible. Not within these sanctums, and yet the readings persisted. Then came the voice. Soft at first, carried not through vox or air, but directly into his thoughts. It was not language, no syllables, no tone, only understanding, pouring like molten gold through his mind. He halted, gripping the spear tightly, as instinct warred with awe. The sensation was like standing beneath a sun that saw you, every atom laid bare. He had felt this before, once, in the earliest years after the heresy, when he had stood before the throne itself and sworn his eternal oath. The presence had touched him then, not as divinity, but as recognition, the emperor's will, incomprehensible yet undeniable. But this was different. It felt fragmented, uncertain, curious. He fell to one knee, head bowed. His voice, barely audible through the helm, uttered a single word: "My lord." The presence surged briefly, bright and sharp, before receding like a tide. In its wake, Valerian felt hollow. The silence that followed was unbearable. He arose, the echo of the word awakening still burning in his thoughts. Was it truly his voice, or something else that had learned how to speak in his tone? He returned to the upper sanctums in silence. Reports would not be filed. Such things were not spoken of openly, even among the 10,000. Each custodian carried his own burdens, his own glimpses of the incomprehensible. To speak of them was to admit doubt, and doubt was the one corruption no armor could protect against.
When he reached the surface levels, he paused before the Hall of Ascendants. It was here that the portraits of fallen custodians hung, each painted in oil and auramite dust, eyes immortalized in devotion. There were fewer now than there once were, their numbers never replenished easily. The 10,000 had become the 9, then the 8, though no record would ever say so aloud. Even perfection eroded, given enough time. He stood before one portrait, the image of Tribune Custodes, who had vanished 3 centuries prior during an internal purge within the ecclesiarchal chambers. His name was never spoken again, his disappearance recorded as reassignment, but Valerian remembered him. Custodes had been the first to question whether the throne's song had changed. A faint hum returned to Valerian's armor, a signal of recall. The next watch cycle was beginning. He turned away from the hall, his movements once again mechanical, flawless. But as he ascended the marble stairs, he passed a reliquary alcove where the statues of ancient heroes stood eternal. Among them, a new fracture had appeared, a thin, jagged crack running down the face of one golden effigy. It should not have been possible. The material was warded, unbreakable. Yet there it was, gleaming faintly like a wound beneath candlelight. He stopped, staring at it for a long time. The palace was shifting, subtle, slow, but real. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely more than a breath. Deviation continues.
And somewhere far below, in the labyrinth of the throne's foundations, the same word echoed back to him, not through vox, but through the walls themselves, vibrating in the marble like a heartbeat. Deviation, deviation, deviation. Valerian stood there until the sound faded, until all was silent once more. Then he raised his spear, straightened his armor, and resumed his post as though nothing had changed. But within the walls of the palace, perfection had cracked, and the golden watchers, bound by oaths that could never end, would soon learn that vigilance was not enough to stop a god from stirring. Valerian remembered fragments of it, not in words but sensations etched into his soul. Pain that folded time into meaningless abstraction, the sound of the emperor's voice, commanding without cruelty, shaping his essence with precision that bordered on divinity. He remembered emerging from that chrysalis of torment, seeing for the first time through eyes not entirely human, and understanding with absolute clarity that he would never again belong to mankind. They were not sons, as the Primarchs were. They were instruments. Where the Space Marines carried the Emperor's design, the Custodes carried his will. Each was a singular reflection of what humanity could be when stripped of doubt, love, and fear. And yet, for all their perfection, they were incomplete. The Emperor had not given them brotherhood. He had denied it deliberately. No two custodians shared a lineage. Their solitude was by design. In the training vaults of the Haikanatoi, Valerian had often seen new initiates, unblooded aspirants, selected from the gene seed candidates of Terra's hidden echelons. They would arrive as mortals, their eyes wide with awe and terror, unaware of what awaited them. The transformation was not merely physical, it was annihilation. Identity erased, replaced by pattern. The flesh reborn into gold, the soul remolded to withstand what no mind should endure. He recalled the words of their first instructor, an elder custodian whose armor bore scars older than most civilizations. "We are not the Emperor's children," the instructor had said, voice echoing through the vast hall. "We are his mirror. We exist to reflect his perfection and to absorb his imperfection." At the time, Valerian had not understood. Now, centuries later, he began to. The laboratories where the Custodes had once been made no longer existed. Officially, they were dismantled during the Age of Apostasy. Unofficially, some whispered that one remained, buried beneath the Null Keep, still active in secret, guarded by the 10,000 themselves, a place where silence reigned, and even thought dared not linger. Valerian found himself drawn there now, guided by something between instinct and compulsion. He moved through the inner levels of the palace, past barriers of light and logic, through corridors that few living beings had ever walked. Each door recognized him, opening in submission to his gene signature. The deeper he went, the more the architecture changed. The marble gave way to dark iron, the gold to sterile glass. The air grew thin, clinical, stripped of incense. Finally, he stood before a single sealed gate, its surface marked by the sigil of the Aquila, wings folded, head bowed. No other sign, no record. He placed his hand upon the plate, and the metal responded with a deep resonance. The gate split open like a wound. The chamber beyond was vast and silent. Rows of suspended cylinders lined the walls, each filled with viscous fluid glowing faintly blue. Within them floated shapes, human and yet not, unfinished, inert, their faces half-formed beneath the fluid. The sight struck Valerian with a heaviness he had not felt in centuries. These were not mere remnants, they were beginnings,
attempts. He approached the nearest cylinder. The figure inside was tall, broad-shouldered, its features eerily familiar. There was an echo of the custodian form, but distorted, too symmetrical, too perfect, as though the human essence had been polished into abstraction. He reached out, resting his hand upon the glass. The surface was cold, and beneath his palm he felt movement. A pulse. The fluid shimmered. For a brief moment, the figure's eyes opened.
They were gold. Valerian stepped back, instinctively raising his spear. The hum of the weapon filled the chamber, a low growl of power. But the form did not move again. The eyes closed, the pulse faded. Only silence remained. He stood there for a long time, surrounded by the unborn. Each of these vessels, he realized, represented an attempt to replicate what could never again be done. The emperor's art had died with him. The Custodes could not be remade. Whatever the mechanicus or the genetic savants of Terra had tried, they had failed. The knowledge was gone, or hidden so deep that even gods would bleed to reach it. And yet, the attempt continued. A low chime echoed through the chamber. Valerian turned toward the sound. Across the far wall, a data slate came to life, ancient code flickering across its surface. Lines of high Gothic interspersed with binary prayer. The language was old, older than the heresy. He could barely decipher it, but one fragment stood clear. Project Aphelion, Continuance Directive. Subject class cannot achieve stable soul link replication. Pattern instability at 0.004 deviation remains terminal. He read the line twice, then again, the words clawing at his mind. The Custodes were not merely flesh. They were bound to the emperor through something deeper, a psychic lattice, a connection forged by his will alone. To recreate them without him was to build statues without spirit. Empty perfection. Valerian turned away. He could not allow himself to linger. There were protocols for this, secrets older than the ecclesiarchy itself. But as he approached the door, the lights dimmed. A faint glow spread across the floor, forming intricate runes of gold and crimson. A voice filled the chamber, not physical, but resonant, echoing within the bones. "Do you still serve, my son?" Valerian froze. The voice was unmistakable, impossible. It was the same tone, the same weight, the same sound that had spoken to the Custodes before the throne fell silent. He dropped to one knee, the sound of his armor striking the floor reverberating like a cathedral bell. "Always," he whispered. The light pulsed, growing brighter. "Then guard what I have left." And just as quickly as it came, it was gone. The chamber returned to stillness, the cylinders lifeless once more. Valerian rose slowly, every motion deliberate. His breath was steady, but his pulse thundered in his ears. He knew better to believe. The emperor did not speak. The emperor could not speak. And yet, something had. He left the chamber and sealed the gate behind him. The echo of the voice followed him all the way to the surface. Valerian returned to the surface with the memory of that voice echoing through him like a sacred wound. It had spoken with the cadence of divinity, but there was something within it, a tremor, a weariness that did not belong to the emperor as he remembered him. He moved through the corridors of gold and stone, his footsteps ringing softly, his mind burning with the weight of revelation. Every custodian was trained to suppress emotion, to let thought flow as logic, to see duty as breath and obedience as pulse. Yet now, beneath his calm exterior, unease began to bloom like frost beneath armor. As he crossed the bridge of hours, light from the upper sanctums spilled across his armor. The sight should have comforted him. The vast stained glass above, the murals depicting the triumph of unity, the banners of the 10,000 hanging untouched by dust. Instead, he felt their gaze. The carved visages of Custodes long gone seemed to watch him as he passed, their painted eyes alive with judgment. He felt, for the first time in centuries, like an intruder within his own temple. He reached the Hall of Genealogy, where the earliest records of the Custodes' creation were preserved. Few dared enter, fewer still were permitted to read. The hall was lined with reliquaries of gold and crystal, each one containing a data slate, a vial of preserved genetic material, or a scrap of parchment inked in the emperor's own hand. The light was dim here, filtered through alabaster panes engraved with the emperor's visage. The silence was absolute. Valerian paused before one reliquary, a simple cube of glass, within which floated a single drop of blood suspended in stasis. It pulsed faintly, as though alive. The label beneath it read, "Sanguis Primus," the first blood, the emperor's own. No one knew what purpose this relic served. It was said to be the foundational template from which all Custodes were shaped. The Mechanicus had begged for access to study it, but the 10,000 had refused. This was not a relic of science. It was sacrament. Valerian reached out and rested his hand against the glass. The pulse quickened, as though aware of his touch. He felt warmth through the gauntlet, soft and faint, like the fading heartbeat of a god. For a moment he imagined that the blood remembered him, that every custodian's essence still whispered to the source from which it came. Then, quietly, he realized the pulse was not constant, it was weakening. He drew back his hand, the faint luminescence within the vial dimmed. No, not weakening, sinking, matching something deeper, slower, the same rhythm he had felt within the throne's pulse. The pattern was identical. The emperor's blood, the throne's vibration, the flicker in the helm, all echoes of one pulse slowing in unison. He turned, leaving the hall behind, his thoughts a labyrinth of cold understanding. The Custodes were not merely guardians of the emperor's body. They were conduits, extensions of his lingering presence. And if his essence was failing, so too would theirs. As he ascended toward the sanctum of the spear, the sound of distant chanting filled the air. Hundreds of servitors knelt in concentric circles, their vox grills emitting monotone hymns in binary praise. At their center stood Captain General Trajan Valorus himself, taller even than Valerian, his armor darker, etched with the scars of millennia. He held his guardian spear upright before him, its blade gleaming with impossible light.
Valerian knelt as he approached, head bowed. "Rise," Valorus commanded, his voice deep and calm, like mountains shifting beneath the earth. Valerian obeyed. "You have seen it," the Captain General said, his tone neither accusatory nor surprised. "The deviation, the pulse, the echoes." Valerian hesitated. "Yes, Lord." Valorus turned his gaze toward the vaulted ceiling. "It spreads through the palace like a thought that cannot die. We have not spoken of it aloud, but it is known. The throne falters." "Is it failing?" Valerian asked quietly. Valorus did not answer immediately. His gauntleted fingers traced the blade of his spear, almost reverently. The emperor's design was never meant to last forever. Even gods require fuel. The psychers burn, the light flickers, the astronomicon wanes. But this is something else. The machinery lives, yet something beneath it stirs, as if the flame seeks to consume itself. Valerian's mind flashed with the image of the voice in the chamber below, of the golden blood pulsing in stasis. "Then it speaks truth,"
he murmured before he could stop himself. The Captain General's helm turned sharply toward him. It? Valerian bowed his head. A voice, Lord, in the sublevels beneath the Null Keep. It spoke with the Emperor's tone. The Captain General was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his words carried a weight that silenced even the servitor's droning hymns. Others have heard it too. Valerian's breath caught. It comes to them in the vaults, in the chambers, in dreams they do not admit to having. Always the same. Command without sound, will without form. I have heard it once myself, centuries ago. It said, "Guard what remains." The words mirrored exactly what Valerian had heard. He felt a chill settle beneath his armor. Then what are we guarding, my lord? Valorous looked at him through the slits of his helm, his eyes burning faintly behind the auramite. Perhaps not what we believe. The air between them felt heavy with unspoken truth. Valerian dared not press further. Valorous turned away. Return to your post. The 10,000 do not doubt. We endure. That is our function until the last light fades.
Valerian bowed deeply. By your command. As he withdrew, he heard Valorous' voice again, quiet almost to himself. But even endurance has its limit. When Valerian returned to the upper halls, the chants had ceased. The palace was silent once more. Yet the silence no longer felt pure. It pulsed faintly with a rhythm, slow, deliberate, alive. The blood of gold was stirring, and the 10,000 could no longer pretend not to feel it. The days that followed blurred together, though time within the palace had long ago ceased to have meaning. The clocks of Terra ticked only for mortals. For the Custodes, time was measured in observation, in the rhythm of steps, in the breath of the throne. Yet now even that rhythm faltered. The intervals of silence grew longer. The hum of the Emperor's machine slowed by imperceptible degrees. And though no mortal instrument could detect the shift, the 10,000 felt it in their bones. Valerian returned to his post upon the 9th tier of the Sanctum Imperialis. The same corridor, the same candles, the same unending watch. Yet the silence now was heavier, layered with questions none dared voice. He stood motionless, a living statue, while the thoughts within him moved like shadows beneath glass. The Emperor's voice, was it real? Or was it the echo of desperation seeking meaning within decay? He tried to dismiss it, to recite the oath of obedience as he had done for centuries, but the words felt hollow. Each syllable fell into the silence and died without resonance. His armor, usually weightless, now pressed upon him like a tomb. He wondered how many of his brothers felt the same, how many stood in their places across the palace, holding the same question like a flame they dared not let burn too bright. A faint vibration passed through the marble beneath his boots, not seismic, not mechanical, a pulse, distant but distinct. It came once, then again, slow, deliberate, the same rhythm as before. He turned his head slightly, scanning the vast corridor. Nothing. No sound, no movement. Yet he knew he was not alone. A figure emerged from the far end of the hall, its golden armor etched with ancient scars, its gait steady, regal. Tribune Orestes, commander of the Shadow Watch, whose duty was to oversee all activity beneath the palace's surface. His presence was both reassurance and warning. The Shadow Watch did not appear without purpose. "Valerian," Orestes said, his voice deep, resonant, carrying the weight of command, "you have been summoned." "By whom, my lord?" "By the Lex Ultima." The word struck him like a blade. The Lex Ultima was not a council. It was a tribunal, a gathering of custodians convened only when the palace itself faced an anomaly that could not be contained. It had been centuries since the last. The mere utterance of its name meant something fundamental had shifted. He followed without hesitation. Together, they descended through the hidden ways of the sanctum, corridors untouched by mortal presence. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Their armor's internal systems compensated for the temperature, but still, Valerian could feel it, an unnatural chill that clung to the edges of perception, as if the very concept of warmth were being drained from the world. The chamber of the Lex Ultima lay beneath the palace's foundation, a sphere of black stone carved by unknown tools, its surface smooth as glass. 10 custodians stood within, each one representing a shield host, their armor darkened by ritual. In the center, upon a dais of onyx, burned a single flame suspended in stasis. It was small, flickering, and yet its light filled the vast chamber with quiet authority. Orestes stepped forward and spoke. The disturbance within the substructure continues. The Mechanicus reports fluctuations in the psychic field surrounding the throne. They cannot explain it. One of the assembled custodians, a tall figure named Alarion, bearer of the solar mantle, spoke, his voice cold. Explain? They dare not even question. Their god sleeps, and they pretend he dreams. A ripple of unease passed through the circle. No one rebuked him. Orestes continued. Reports of auditory manifestations have increased. 6 custodians have claimed to hear the voice. The words echoed like thunder through the chamber. Blasphemy, another custodian hissed, though his tone held more fear than condemnation. No, said Valerian, stepping forward before he could stop himself. His voice was steady. Truth. All eyes turned toward him. I heard it, he said, in the Null Keep. It spoke with command, not illusion. It said, guard what remains. Silence. Orestes looked at him, long and hard, his expression unreadable behind the mask. And do you believe it was him? Valerian hesitated. I do not know, but the pulse, the blood, the light, all move together. If it was not him, then something wears his voice. Alarion stepped closer, the golden light reflecting off the black stone. Then we must ask the question that no one dares. What if the emperor's divinity was never still? What if the throne does not contain him, but evolve him?
Gasps escaped even the 10,000. The word itself, evolve, was dangerous. It implied change, and change was the one heresy the Custodes could not allow. Orestes' voice cut through the tension. You tread on the edge of heresy, brother. And yet, Alarion replied, his tone sharp, we all feel it, the pulse beneath our feet, the silence that listens back. You would have us stand guard forever over something we do not understand. Orestes turned away, his armor gleaming in the stasis light. Understanding is not our duty. Valerion's gaze drifted toward the suspended flame. It pulsed, faintly, matching the rhythm he had felt within the throne, within the vial of golden blood. Each flicker seemed slower, weaker. And if our duty ends, he asked softly. The flame dimmed further, as though in answer. None spoke. The chamber seemed to breathe, the air thick with the weight of revelation none could name aloud. At last, Orestes turned toward Valerion. You will return to the Null Keep, observe the fluctuations, report any further manifestations. Valerion bowed, as commanded. The tribunal dispersed in silence. As they ascended back toward the light, he could still feel the pulse through the floor, steady, patient, and inevitable. The blood of gold flowed on, and its rhythm no longer matched that of man. Even as the wars of the Imperium raged across 1,000,000 worlds, Terra itself never slept. Its skies were a storm of fire and faith, its surface a continent of stone and devotion, yet beneath the banners and the prayers, another war was fought, one that had no name, no record, no victory. It was the war within the palace itself, waged not with bolters or blades, but with silence and secrecy. And the Custodes, for all their shining glory, were its unseen soldiers. Valerian's descent into the underworld of Terra began before dawn, if dawn could still be said to exist beneath the smog-choked heavens. From the outer ramparts of the sanctum, he moved through tunnels so ancient that even the data archives called them pre-imperial strata. There was no light, save for the dim luminescence of his armor, casting long reflections across the metal bones of the palace. Each corridor was a scar, each door a secret. His orders were simple: observe, report, and contain. But there was no need to ask what he was expected to find. The pulse, the deviation, was growing. The Mechanicus called it a resonance anomaly. The Ordo Sinister whispered it was the dying heartbeat of the throne. But among the 10,000, a different rumor spread like infection. Some said the Emperor's soul was not fading, but dividing, splintering into fragments that whispered through the palace walls. Each fragment a thought, each thought a potential will.
The lower levels were a world apart. The air shimmered with radiation and sacred vapors. Half-mechanical priests shuffle the long gantries, their limbs whispering prayers to data spirits. Their eyes, if they could still be called eyes, glowed with devotion beyond reason. When Valerian passed, they fell to their knees, their mechanical mouths muttering Bienheric litanies too fast for human comprehension. He moved past them without acknowledgement. To them, he was the Emperor's will made flesh. But if they could see within his mind, they would have realized the terrible irony of that title. He reached the Null Keep once more. The gate's seals recognized his gene signature instantly, opening in a hiss of sanctified air. The inner chamber glowed faintly with the light of containment fields, each one marking the location of relics too dangerous to destroy. Weapons forged in the dark age of technology, psychic shards sealed in stasis, even remnants of corrupted gene stock once used to create failed custodians. The air itself felt alive, thick with memory, heavy with consequence. He moved toward the central platform where the containment pylons converged. The hum beneath the floor was stronger now, rhythmic, undeniable. It pulsed through his armor like the echo of a heartbeat amplified by the metal around him. Every flicker of the lights seemed to move in time with it. And then he saw it, a disturbance in the field, faint at first, then growing. A shimmer of gold like sunlight through water, spreading across the chamber walls. Valerian froze. The sensors in his armor flared with warnings, reading psychic interference levels beyond measurement. The air crackled with unseen pressure. Then came the whisper. Not through vox, not through thought, through reality itself. They watch me still. Valerian's vision swam. The walls of the chamber rippled, shifting between light and shadow, form and void. He fell to one knee, the weight of the voice pressing upon him like gravity. His mind strained against it, his training the only thing keeping him from fracturing under the psychic weight. The voice continued, soft, distant, echoing through his skull like the hum of forgotten machinery. You remember, you who still see. Then, as suddenly as it came, it was gone. The lights returned to normal. The hum receded. The containment field stabilized. Valerian gasped for breath, the echo of the words still burning in his mind. His armor systems rebooted in sequence, flooding him with status readouts and medical alerts. But none of it mattered. The meaning of the voice was clear, though he dared not name it.
He rose unsteadily and surveyed the chamber. One of the containment pylons had fractured, its surface split by hairline cracks that glowed faintly with inner light. Inside it floated a single object,
a fragment of armor, dark and scorched, embossed with the sigil of the Aquila. It should have been inert. Yet now it pulsed with the same golden rhythm that had haunted him for weeks. He approached cautiously. The aura around it shimmered like heat haze. As he extended his hand, his gauntlet vibrated with psychic feedback, a pulse of resistance that pushed against him. Not hostile, but deliberate. The fragment knew him. It recognized him. He withdrew his hand, lowering his spear in reverence. "By your will," he murmured. And for an instant, the hum beneath the palace answered, not in words, but in acknowledgement. He left the chamber in silence, his every step echoing with the memory of what he had heard. By the time he reached the surface again, Terra's skies were alive with fire. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another hive had risen in rebellion. The Adeptus Arbites would crush it within hours, as they always did. But the timing gnawed at him. Every time the pulse grew stronger, somewhere on the planet below, humanity turned upon itself, as if the Emperor's silence was being echoed by the despair of his people. Above him, the Astronomicon flickered, a brief, impossible dimming, lasting no longer than a heartbeat. And for that single moment, every ship in the void had felt the same thing Valerian did within the palace: absence. The light returned, the Imperium continued, but the shadow had been born, and the 10,000, bound by duty older than stars, began to realize that they were no longer guardians of the living, but custodians of a secret the Imperium could not survive knowing. The shadow war of Terra had begun. In the days that followed, the palace grew uneasy. No words were spoken, no alarm sounded, yet all who served within its walls felt it, the subtle tilt of reality, the breath before a storm. The light no longer fell the same way. Vox channels flickered with static that no adept could trace. The Mechanicus sang louder, as though drowning out something that hummed beneath their hymns. Even the air itself seemed to carry the weight of listening. Valerian kept his silence. His report to the Captain General had been delivered, precise and without embellishment. Psychic disturbance, structural fluctuation, unknown origin. Nothing of the voice. To speak of that would be to fracture the sanctity of their purpose. The Custodes did not speculate, they obeyed. Yet beneath his calm composure, thoughts coiled like serpents in the dark. He found himself assigned to new patrols, not of the palace, but of the outer sanctuaries, where pilgrims gathered in endless waves beneath the colossi of stone. There, beyond the adamantine walls, Terra writhed beneath the weight of its own devotion. Billions of faithful pressed against the barriers of the Imperium's heart, their bodies forming oceans of supplication. Their chants rose in ceaseless harmony, a storm of prayer that blanketed the world in noise. From his vantage atop the gate of eternity, Valerian watched them, tiny, countless, desperate. He wondered what they prayed for. Did they know what lay behind the walls they worshipped? Did they imagine the Emperor as light or as flesh? Would their faith survive the truth if it ever escaped its cage of gold?
Behind him, the palace loomed like a mountain of silence. The vox within his helm crackled once, an encrypted transmission from Orestes. Movement detected within the lower catacombs. Unregistered biosigns. Proceed with discretion. Valerian descended without hesitation. His armor adjusted to stealth protocols, the gold dimming to a matte bronze, his presence muted. The corridors grew narrow, their walls rough with ancient stonework. These passages predated the Imperium, carved by forgotten hands when Terra was still fractured by warlords and empires. Few had walked them since. The further he went, the more he felt it, a rhythm, faint but growing, like distant footsteps keeping time with his own. He halted. The sound stopped. He resumed. It followed.
He turned a corner and froze. A figure stood ahead, half shrouded in shadow. Its armor was old, archaic, its design recalling the earliest days of the Custodes. The auramite was dulled with age, its surface cracked, but the presence it carried was undeniable. A custodian, one long thought dead. The figure inclined his head slightly. "You heard it too," it said. The voice was low, resonant, human. Valerian's hand tightened on his spear. "Identify yourself." The figure stepped into the light. His face, though hidden beneath the helm, bore the insignia of the Heteron Bard, the emperor's personal retinue, all thought entombed after the heresy. "I am Leontis," the stranger said. "I served him before the throne bound his body." Valerian's thoughts flickered with disbelief. Impossible. Leontis laughed softly. "So they told me once. Yet here I stand." The silence stretched between them, heavy as the palace itself. Then Leontis spoke again. "The throne stirs, brother. The walls hum with his breath. You've felt it." Valerian did not deny it. "You speak of heresy." Leontis shook his head slowly. "No, I speak of truth, the kind the Imperium has forgotten." He took a step closer, his presence immense even after millennia of silence. "We were told to guard him, but what if the throne was not a prison, but a chrysalis?"
Valerian's voice grew sharp. "If he changes, if he becomes something else, can the Imperium survive it?" Leontis regarded him for a long moment, then answered with a sorrowful calm. "The Imperium was never meant to survive, only to endure until he returned." Before Valerian could speak again, the corridor shook. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. A roar echoed through the stone, low and vast, like the sound of a world sighing. Lights along the walls flickered, then extinguished. The pulse returned, louder now, steady, deliberate. Leontis turned his gaze upward. "Do you hear it?" Valerian did. The hum was no longer confined to the palace. It rolled through the bones of Terra itself, a vibration that resonated with every living thing. The pilgrims above had fallen silent, their endless chanting broken by instinctive awe. The Astronomicon flared once, brilliant, blinding, then dimmed again to a dull glow. Leontis took a step back, his voice barely above a whisper. "He calls to us, Valerian. Not as a god, but as what he always was." "And what is that?" Valerian demanded. Leontis turned, his figure receding into the shadow. "A man who never stopped fighting." And then he was gone. Valerian stood alone in the darkness, the pulse now a steady thunder within his veins. Above, alarms began to sound across the palace. Vox traffic filled the air, fragmented reports, static, cries of confusion. He looked up toward the unseen ceiling, where the Emperor's throne sat in silence, and felt a truth settle within him like the weight of eternity. Something within the throne had moved, and the war beneath Terra had finally become real. The alarms faded as swiftly as they had begun, leaving only a tremor in the walls, a shiver through the bones of the palace itself. Whatever had stirred below had vanished into silence, and yet the silence now felt awake. Even the air seemed to wait for something, heavy with the residue of unseen will. Valerian stood in the dark corridor long after Leontis had disappeared, his armor sensors still whispering faint warnings across his helm display. The readings made no sense, no heat signatures, no energy sources, and yet the space around him pulsed faintly, like a lung inhaling and exhaling time. He ascended the lower passages with care, each step deliberate, his spear's haft brushing against the wall as though to remind the palace that the Emperor's sentinel had not abandoned his post. But beneath that outward calm, the turmoil within him grew. Leontis' words had not left his mind. A chrysalis. Could the Emperor be changing, reshaping himself into something new? And if he was, what would that mean for the Imperium, for the galaxy, and for the 10,000 who had sworn to guard his stillness forever.
He reached the Hall of Sacrifice, one of the great vaulted sanctuaries connecting the lower levels to the Sanctum Imperialis. Thousands of candles flickered in their alcoves, their light reflecting off pools of oil and gold leaf upon the floor. Dozens of robed adepts knelt before shrines, whispering prayers in a dozen dialects, their words melting together into one ceaseless murmur. As Valerian entered, the sound faltered. The adepts sensed him, not through sight, but through the deep resonance of his presence. Their prayers died in their throats, heads bowed lower. He moved among them like a living statue, and yet something in their silence troubled him. Fear. Not awe, not reverence. Fear, as though they too had felt the pulse beneath their knees. He reached the dais at the center of the hall, where a single priest stood, his face hidden behind an iron mask engraved with 1,000 holy symbols. The man trembled visibly as Valerian approached. "Custodian," he whispered, his voice cracked with exhaustion. "The relics tremble. The icons, they bleed." Valerian's gaze followed the priest's shaking hand to the great mural that adorned the apse, a depiction of the emperor upon the throne, radiant, untouchable. At first, Valerian saw nothing amiss. Then, as the candlelight shifted, he saw it. Tiny rivulets of crimson seeping from the painted eyes of the emperor's visage. The blood ran down the mural's surface, staining the gold beneath it. The priest fell to his knees, weeping. "He weeps for us," he cried. Valerian stepped closer, his mind fighting to impose order upon the sight. The air around the mural pulsed faintly, the same rhythm again, steady, deliberate. He reached out, touching the marble surface with a gauntleted hand. It was warm, not from heat, but from life. A sudden flash of sensation struck him. Not sight, not sound, memory. He saw a field of broken bodies beneath a black sun. He saw the emperor walking among them, his armor cracked, his eyes burning with light too fierce to look upon. He felt the heat of that gaze, not cruel, but endless, merciless purpose. Then it was gone. He staggered back a step, his heart pounding. The priest still knelt, his arms raised in supplication, oblivious to the silence that now filled the hall. He turned away. There was no use in denial now. The resonance had spread beyond the throne. It reached through the palace, through the stone, through faith itself. The emperor's presence, whatever it was becoming, had begun to touch the minds of men. As Valerian moved through the corridors toward the upper levels, he passed squads of custodians repositioning in perfect formation, their movements calm, but their eyes alive with awareness. They felt it too. Every one of them. The 10,000 shared no telepathic bond, yet in that moment, they all knew. The Shadow War had reached its second phase. It was no longer a question of observation. It was containment. When Valerian reached the command sanctum, Tribune Orestes awaited him. The elder custodian stood beside a hololithic projection of the palace, its surface mapped in shimmering detail. Across it, faint red points flickered like dying stars. "Incidents," Orestes said simply.
How many? Too many to be coincidence, Orestes gestured to the map. Faith riots in the lower cathedra, Vox interference across the astronomican vaults. 2 servitor hives deactivated themselves without command, and the Mechanicus claimed to have detected psychic echoes within the throne's circuitry. Valerian stared at the red lights. Each one marked a breach in faith, an awakening of the same pulse he had felt. Does the Captain General know? He knows, and he has ordered the locks sealed. No one leaves the palace. No one enters, not even the High Lords. Valerian's eyes lifted toward the projection's heart, the Sanctum Imperialis, glowing faintly in gold. And what of him? Orestes did not answer. His silence was heavier than any confession. After a long pause, he said, "You will join the vigilant host in the lower sanctum.
If there is movement again, you will witness it." Valerian bowed. "By your will, Tribune." As he turned to leave, Orestes' voice stopped him. "If you hear the voice again, do not answer." Valerian froze. The warning was spoken softly, but its meaning was grave. He nodded once and departed. Outside, the light of the palace burned brighter than before, as though defying the darkness rising beneath it. The pilgrims beyond the walls had resumed their chanting, louder now, frenzied, desperate. And through the chaos, through the endless noise of devotion, Valerian thought he heard something beneath it all, something vast and distant, breathing in time with the pulse. The emperor still lived, of that there was no doubt, but he was no longer sleeping, and the war for his silence had just begun. The golden throne was older than memory, older than the empire it sustained. It was not built, it was grown, layer upon layer of sacred machinery and impossible material fused with the emperor's will in an age when science and divinity still spoke the same language. Every servo, every rune, every burning conduit of psychic light had once been touched by his hand. To look upon it was to see eternity made tangible. To stand near it was to feel one's soul bend beneath its gravity. And now it was changing.
Valerian descended through the concentric gates that led to the Sanctum Golden, escorted by a silent detachment of custodians whose armor gleamed like liquid sunlight. None spoke. Words were irrelevant here. In this place, only duty existed. The further they went, the more the air shimmered, not with heat, but with psychic distortion. The hum of the throne filled the world, a low, resonant vibration that penetrated bone and thought alike. It was said that to stand too close for too long could unmake a man's sanity, his mind frayed by the sheer density of his presence. But the 10,000 were not men. They were reflections of his perfection. They endured. The final gate opened, and Valerian beheld the throne once more. Even after centuries, the sight struck him with the same awe and dread as the first time he had laid eyes upon it. The vast chamber stretched beyond the limits of vision, its walls alive with moving light, the air dense with the scent of ozone and sanctified ash. At its center rose the throne itself, a mountain of gold and bone, cables and crystal veins winding through it like arteries. Its surface burned with shifting light, neither holy nor profane, but something that defied all mortal definition. Upon that impossible construct sat the emperor. His body, immense and motionless, was wrapped in the remains of armor that had once been white gold, now blackened and cracked. His face was hidden behind the shadow of the great cables that pierced his skull and spine, linking him eternally to the machine. His hands, vast and skeletal, rested upon the arms of the throne. And though he had not moved in 10,000 years, there was no mistaking the sensation of presence. It was not a corpse that sat there. It was power, endless, unbound and unspeaking. But today, something was different. The air around the throne pulsed, faintly at first, then with the slow, steady rhythm that Valerian had come to dread, the same pulse that had echoed through the palace, through the null keep, through the blood of gold. The custodians halted as one, their formation breaking only in the smallest of hesitations. The Adeptus Mechanicus priests attending the machine continued their rituals, their voices high and frantic, their mechadendrites weaving through air thick with psychic static. Valerian stepped forward. The hum of the throne pressed against him, like a living force, resonating through his armor, through his very being. He felt it before he heard it, the shift, the tremor, the impossible vibration that rippled through the air like a whisper through water. Then came the sound, a voice, not in his ears, but within the marrow of his bones.
Still they feed me. Valerian's knees buckled. He fell forward, his spear clattering against the floor, its sanctified tip sparking against the gold. Around him, the Adeptus Mechanicus wailed in Binharic ecstasy, unaware that anything was amiss. To them, the fluctuations were holy. To Valerian, they were terrifyingly intimate. Still they bring me the broken. Still they make their offering of souls.
The image struck him unbidden. The psychers, those countless condemned souls who were fed into the throne each day, their life force burned to sustain the Astronomicon's light. He had seen it only once, long ago. A procession of hollow-eyed wretches led to their unmaking, their screams dissolving into light as they were consumed. He had told himself it was mercy, that their sacrifice allowed humanity to see the stars. But now, hearing the voice that called itself the Emperor, he felt that truth twist like a knife. He rose slowly, the sound of his armor grinding against the gold floor. "My lord," he whispered, his voice trembling despite himself, "is this your will?" There was silence. Then, softly, "Once, I was the hand that shaped mankind. Now, I am the hunger that sustains it." The words tore through him. Every oath, every litany, every sacred truth he had built his life upon cracked beneath their weight. The throne, the symbol of eternal protection, now sounded like a tomb that whispered. The light flared. Valerian's helm displays went blind with overload. He tore the mask free, blinking through the brilliance. The Emperor's body still sat unmoving upon the throne, but around him the golden aura had changed. It no longer radiated outward, it drew inward, folding upon itself, pulling light, pulling air, pulling souls. The very room seemed to lean toward him, as if all creation were being swallowed back into its source. One of the custodians beside Valerian stumbled. His armor's power fields flared, screaming as though in pain. He collapsed to one knee, then to the floor, his body shaking violently. Valerian reached for him, but it was too late. The light took him, his form dissolving into a cloud of golden motes that drifted toward the throne and vanished into its glow. Valerian froze. The air smelled of ozone and ash. The remaining custodians did not move. They could not. None would dare to question what they had just witnessed. The throne pulsed once more. "I take what is mine." And then the light faded. The adepts resumed their chanting. The custodians reformed their ranks. The hum returned to its usual rhythm, as if nothing had happened. But Valerian knew. He had seen it. The throne consuming one of the 10,000, the most perfect of mankind, without hesitation, without remorse. The machinery had not failed. It had fed. He knelt, his head bowed, his mind caught between faith and horror. If the Emperor still lived, then what was the throne now? A conduit or a predator? He rose, his voice steady though his soul trembled. "By your will," he whispered once more, though this time it sounded less like prayer and more like surrender. The hum of the throne answered him, a sound too low for words, a sound that might have been approval or hunger. When Valerian left the Sanctum Golden, the world seemed quieter, emptier, as though sound itself feared to exist in the wake of what he had witnessed. The corridors that led away from the throne were lined with murals depicting humanity's ascension, the emperor radiant among his armies, his hand outstretched in guidance. Yet the gold of those murals felt dull now, tarnished by knowledge he could not unsee. He passed beneath their gaze like a man walking through the ruins of a faith that still pretended to stand. He did not know how long he walked. In the palace, time was a luxury for mortals. For the Custodes, it was merely endurance stretched across eternity. But today, every step carried the weight of revelation, each echo of his boots upon the marble floor sounding like the toll of a bell for something sacred that had died. He thought of the one who had vanished before the throne, the brother whose name he could not even recall because the 10,000 were not allowed such things. Custodians were records, not men, instruments, not souls. Yet when the light had taken him, Valerian had felt the loss in a way that pierced deeper than any wound. It was as if a note had been removed from a symphony so ancient it had forgotten it was music. He reached the upper levels of the palace as the great bells of the ecclesiarchy began their morning litany. Their tones rolled through the air like waves of molten brass, shaking the pillars, rattling the light itself. Outside, the masses knelt in synchronized reverence, faces uplifted to the golden towers that crowned Terra's skies. They did not know. They would never know. To them, the emperor was the sun that never dimmed. But within these walls, the light had begun to flicker. He found Orestes in the vigil chamber, surrounded by a ring of hollow projections that painted the air in shifting sigils of data. The tribune turned as Valerian entered, his expression hidden behind the helm's blank mask. "You went too near," he said quietly. No accusation in his voice, only grim recognition. Valerian stopped a few paces away. The throne spoke. Orestes inclined his head slightly, as if to say he expected no less. "You heard him." "I heard something." Valerian's voice was barely audible, as though speaking the truth too loudly might break the world. "It knows what we feed it. The psychers, the sacrifices, it is aware of them. It called itself hunger." The silence that followed was not surprise, it was confirmation. At last Orestes said, "You think this is new, that the throne began to feed only now?" He gestured to the hololiths, which shifted to display streams of numerical sequences, voltage readings, psychic flux, soul energy metrics. "It has always fed. The emperor's mind, what remains of it, draws upon them to sustain the Astronomicon. Without that fire, the Imperium dies in darkness. You know this." Valerian's hands clenched at his sides. "I have known duty, but not this consumption. What I saw was not preservation. It was feeding. The throne took one of us." For a moment, even Orestes was silent. The golden light from the displays flickered across his armor, catching the fine etchings of prayers carved into its surface. "You are certain?" "I watched it happen," Valerian said. "No failure, no rupture. He was drawn in as if called home." Orestes turned away. "Then the change has begun." "The change?" The tribune's gaze drifted to the vault doors beyond the chamber, where the seals of the Adeptus Mechanicus glowed faintly. "There are records older than even we, hidden in the data vaults beneath the cradle of Thyre, designs written by the emperor's own hand. The throne was never meant to be eternal. It was to be a bridge, one that would lead him beyond flesh." Valerian's breath caught. "Beyond?" Orestes nodded. "The Mechanicus claims the throne is failing because it cannot bear the strain, but I have read the sealed liturgies. It is not failing, it is transforming.
The throne was built to consume until only the divine pattern remained, until humanity's suffering became the crucible for his rebirth. Valerian took a step forward, his voice low. Then the psychers, the sacrifices, even the Custodes, they are the fuel. Orestes turned to him fully now. The Emperor does not die, brother. He becomes. The words hung in the air like a death knell. Valerian wanted to deny them. He wanted to believe in the purity of their purpose, in the unbroken sanctity of the throne. But he could still feel the echo of that voice in his mind, the deep, hollow resonance that had said, "I take what is mine." And somewhere beneath the horror, something else stirred within him. Awe. If the Emperor was not dying but transforming, then perhaps this was not an ending but an evolution too vast for mortals or even custodians to comprehend. But awe is close to fear. The Vox channel in Orestes' helm flared with static. A voice crackled through, filtered and panicked. "Tribune, mass fluctuation in the lower conduits. The pi readings are—" The signal cut to a shriek of interference. Orestes moved instantly, his spear snapping to life. "He calls again," he said grimly. Valerian followed. The two custodians moved through the palace like living blades, descending into the machinery beneath the sanctum. The light grew dimmer with every level, the air hotter, thicker, filled with the metallic tang of blood and ozone.
They reached the conduit galleries, a labyrinth of pipes and glowing veins that pulsed with psychic energy. The glow was erratic now, flaring and dimming as if the palace itself were breathing unevenly. Tech priests scurried across the platforms, their mechadendrites whipping in panic, their binary hymns stuttering. At the gallery's center, the floor had split. Golden stone had cracked open, revealing beneath it a lattice of light that pulsed with organic rhythm. It looked less like machinery and more like flesh. Veins of energy ran through it, glowing gold-red with psychic fire, and from its depths came the unmistakable sound of heartbeat. Orestes stared down, his voice barely a whisper. "The throne grows." Valerian could not speak. He felt the pulse in his chest, matching his own. For a moment, he could not tell where his body ended and the throne began. The distinction between man and God had blurred, and he realized then that the palace was no longer merely a monument to the emperor's will. It was his body, his heart, his hunger, spreading quietly through every wall and corridor. And it was still feeding. The heartbeat thundered through the conduits, rolling like a storm trapped beneath stone. It was not a sound, but a sensation, something that pressed against the soul, demanding recognition. The golden light that pulsed beneath the floor grew brighter with each beat, illuminating the chamber in waves of living radiance. The Mechanicus adepts had fallen to their knees, their mechadendrites raised in trembling devotion. Their binary voices rose in fractured hymns, 1,000 tones layered into an ocean of static worship. Valerian felt the vibration climb through his armor, crawling into the spaces between bone and thought. The rhythm was too perfect, too measured, as though time itself were being rewritten in pulse and breath. He turned to Orestes, whose stance remained rigid, though his armor's readouts flickered wildly. "If it grows unchecked," Valerian said quietly, "it will consume the palace." Orestes nodded once, his eyes burning behind the visor. "Then we will contain it, as we have contained every storm before." But Valerian heard the hesitation beneath his command, the tremor that betrayed the same impossible question that haunted his own mind. What if this storm is him? Without warning, the pulse spiked. The conduits ruptured in a bloom of gold light, shards of marble and aurumite erupting outward. A wave of psychic pressure slammed through the chamber, flinging servitors into the walls and hurling Mechanicus adepts from their perches. Valerian braced himself, his armor stabilizers flaring. Orestes raised his spear, its blade glowing as it absorbed the impact, but even the holy weapon trembled in his grip.
From the wound in the floor, light poured upward in spiraling patterns. It was not random, it was language. Runes of gold and crimson twisted in the air, alive with meaning older than speech. They shimmered, rearranged, formed again. Valerian recognized fragments of it, words of the Emperor's earliest dialect, symbols found only in the Codex Imperialis, the tongue of creation itself. Orestes' voice was steady, but his tone carried reverence. He speaks. Valerian could barely breathe. The light coalesced, forming a single sigil that burned in the air before them. It was the Imperial Aquila, but not as he had ever seen it. The wings were unfurled, the twin heads turned inward, facing each other, their eyes burning with the same molten light as the throne. The symbol pulsed once, and the golden glow faded, leaving the smell of scorched metal and sanctified blood.
The chamber was silent. Orestes lowered his spear. "Signal the Captain General. The throne is communicating." But before Valerian could respond, a voice echoed through the vox, a custodian's tone, strained, broken. "All units, upper sanctums, manifestation detected. The Emperor's light, it moves." Orestes turned sharply toward the exit. "Go!" They ascended through the lift shafts in silence, the sound of the throne's pulse following them upward like a heartbeat buried in the world. When they emerged into the sanctum of veils, the air was thick with golden mist. The light here was not steady. It swirled, drifting like smoke, forming shapes that dissolved before the eye could define them. Valerian's steps slowed. Something vast was unfolding above them. The mist drew inward, condensing toward the throne's apex. Energy arced across the pillars, singing like a choir of dying stars. The Custodes who stood watch before the throne now knelt, their armor flickering as the psychic pressure climbed beyond tolerance. And then the light solidified. It took form, not flesh, not matter, but presence. A figure suspended in the air, its outline human but unbound by gravity, its face veiled in radiance. It hung above the throne, arms outstretched, as if mirroring the golden statue that crowned the palace miles above. The voice that followed was everywhere at once, within the walls, within the air, within the blood of every living thing on Terra. "I have eaten of the stars, and they are ash. I have burned 1,000 souls, and still my hunger endures. You would chain me to your prayers, but I was never yours to command." The sound shattered thought. Valerian fell to one knee, not in worship, but in awe so pure it bordered on terror. He could not tell whether he was hearing the Emperor or something that had grown from him, something born of his endless imprisonment, his unceasing consumption. Orestes tried to speak, his voice strangled by reverence. "Lord of mankind!" The voice cut him off, not with anger, but with inevitability. "There is no Lord. There is only will." The light dimmed then, fading like the last breath of a dying star. The figure dissolved into mist, drawn back into the throne, until nothing remained but silence and the echo of those words. When sound returned, it came in the form of chanting. The Mechanicus had resumed their rituals, unaware or unwilling to admit that divinity had shifted in their midst. The Custodes around the throne rose, their movements slow, uncertain, as though waking from a dream they could not recall. Valerian turned to Orestes. The tribune's armor smoked faintly from the psychic heat, his voice hoarse when he spoke. "The Emperor is changing." Valerian's answer came softly. "Or something else is wearing his name."
They stood there, side by side, before the throne that ate men, the machine that devoured life to sustain light, and neither spoke again. For in their silence, they both knew the truth. The throne was no longer merely a relic. It was becoming something alive. And when gods awaken, empires tremble. Dawn on Terra was no longer dawn. The sun's light fought through a sky thick with ash, pollution, and the shimmer of the Astronomicon, its sacred beam rippling like a wound across the heavens. But even that eternal beacon, the Emperor's divine light that guided the fleets of man through the warp, now faltered. The adepts who attended the beacon's transmissions spoke of fluctuations they could not explain, of constellations blinking in and out of existence, of ships lost to silence mid-transit. The Emperor's light, once constant, now pulsed, as if it, too, were breathing. And on the surface of the throne world, something vast and invisible was unfolding. Valerian stood upon the outer balcony of the Sanctum Imperialis, gazing across the endless cityscape. The palace stretched beneath him like the bones of a dead god, spires and domes rising from the mist in titanic solemnity. He had watched this same horizon for centuries, unmoving, unchanging. But today, he felt the difference in the air, the faint vibration that hummed beneath every structure, the strange stillness that preceded revelation. Behind him, the chamber doors opened with a hiss. Tribune Orestes stepped through, his armor dulled by fatigue. Even custodians could not hide the strain of what they had witnessed. The Captain General convenes the silent council. Every shield host is being recalled, even those stationed on Luna. Valerian turned. Has it begun? Orestes hesitated. It has already begun. The palace is alive. The conduits grow without pattern. The Mechanicus call it expansion. The Ecclesiarchy calls it corruption. The Ecclesiarchy calls it miracle. And all are wrong. Valerian's eyes drifted toward the horizon again. In the distance, faint golden threads shimmered where they should not, lines of light running between spires, pulsing faintly like veins. "How long?" he asked. Orestes answered without turning. "Weeks, maybe days. Whatever the Emperor is becoming, he is no longer bound to that throne alone." They walked together through the great halls, past lines of silent statues and banners that bore the weight of 10,000 years of victory and loss. Custodians passed them in disciplined silence, but Valerian could feel the tension radiating from them, tiny fractures in the perfect obedience that had defined them since time immemorial. They all felt it, the old order trembling beneath their feet. The silent council met in the Hall of Echoes, where even sound dared not linger. 12 custodians stood in a circle of golden light, their armor reflecting the shifting glow of the floor beneath them. At the center hovered a hololithic projection of Terra itself, but distorted, its surface laced with networks of gold that had not existed a month ago. Lines of light ran from the palace to the poles, spreading outward like roots burrowing through the crust. Captain General Trajan Valerius stood before the image, his armor blackened by ceremony, his voice steady but solemn. "Brothers, what we have guarded for millennia now moves of its own will. The Mechanicus cannot explain it. The Ecclesiarchy dares not question it. But we—" He paused. "We must decide what it means."
Orestes spoke first. "It is the Emperor's ascension. The bridge he built is complete." Another custodian stepped forward, his tone sharper. "Or his corruption. We have seen the throne consume our kin. If he feeds now on us, what are we protecting?" Valorous looked to Valerian. "And you, shield captain, you have seen the throne more closely than any living custodian. What is your judgment?" The question struck like a weapon. Judgment was not their right. The 10,000 did not interpret, they obeyed. Yet now obedience felt hollow. Valerian's voice was low when he answered. "I saw light take a man's body and leave no trace. I heard a voice that called itself hunger, but I also saw it shape the air into meaning.
I cannot say whether it was God or ghost. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Valoris spoke again, his tone measured. The High Lords would have us declare this a miracle. The Ecclesiarch will soon proclaim it divine resurrection, but the throne does not share its will with them. It speaks only through its keepers, through us. Orestes inclined his head. Then what do we tell them? Valoris's eyes glinted through the visor. Nothing. The Imperium cannot know, not yet. The throne must be guarded, not from outsiders, but from the truth it now contains. Valerian felt the weight of the order settle over the chamber like a shroud. The 10,000 had always been the Emperor's voice, in silence, his will made manifest through obedience. But now, for the first time ever, they were being asked to guard not his body, but his transformation, and to do so in secrecy. The Captain General's words hung like judgment. No mortal must learn that the Emperor changes, not the Ecclesiarch, not the Inquisition, not the Astra Telepathica. If we must burn 1,000 shrines to preserve that silence, then we will do so. The custodians bowed their heads as one. By his will. But Valerian hesitated before speaking the words. By whose will now? When the council dispersed, he lingered in the vast hall, the echo of their vows still vibrating through the golden air. His reflection stared back at him from the polished floor, golden, perfect, emotionless, a guardian without question, a weapon without soul. Yet he felt something beneath the armor now, something alive and uncertain. He turned his gaze upward, toward the vaults of the palace, where the throne pulsed unseen. The light flickered once across the walls, forming briefly into a shape, a hand, open, reaching, before dissolving into gold dust. For the first time in centuries, Valerian allowed himself to whisper aloud what no custodian dared to think.
If you awaken, what will you make of us? The palace did not answer, but the hum that followed sounded almost like laughter. Terra burned with quiet devotion. Billions of pilgrims gathered beneath the shadow of the imperial palace, their chants rising like waves against the golden mountain. To them, nothing had changed. The emperor was eternal, unyielding, the flame that would never fade. But within those sacred walls, the truth had already rewritten itself. The throne had begun to dream. Valerian walked the upper sanctums alone, his armor dulled by shadow. The corridors of the palace whispered softly as he passed, the golden surfaces alive with faint vibrations, as if listening. The sound was everywhere now, a slow, rhythmic hum that pulsed in time with the Emperor's unseen heartbeat. It no longer belonged to the machinery. It belonged to the world itself. He paused before a vast viewing arch where the city below shimmered like molten metal under the dawn. Lightning danced across the spires, but it was not weather. It was energy. Drawn through the veins of the throne, threading its way across the bones of Terra. What had once been lifeless gold was now alive, spreading slowly, patiently, as though the planet itself were becoming an extension of the Emperor's will. Behind him, the heavy doors opened. Captain General Valoris entered, his steps measured, his voice subdued but firm. "You have seen the outer sanctums." "Yes," Valerian replied without turning. "The gold grows." Valoris came to stand beside him, his gaze sweeping the same horizon. "The Mechanicus cannot trace its pattern. They claim it feeds on atmospheric ions, heat, psychic residue, but it is none of those things. It grows only where faith is strongest." Valerian looked toward the masses below, the endless crowds that sang and wept and burned in devotion. "Then faith feeds it," he murmured. Valoris's voice was low, unreadable. "Perhaps faith is being eaten." The words lingered like smoke.
For a long moment they both watched the horizon in silence. Then Valoris continued. The High Lords have sent envoys demanding explanation. They suspect heresy, corruption. They will not understand what they are truly witnessing, and they cannot be allowed to. You mean to keep it hidden? Valerian asked. Valoris nodded. Until the change completes. Whatever he becomes, whatever this is, it must not be interrupted. We were created for his service, not his definition. Valerian turned toward him, the unease in his chest no longer deniable. And if what rises is no longer him?
The Captain General's gaze remained fixed upon the golden skyline. Then we will guard that as well. Outside, thunder rolled across the polluted heavens. The wind carried the chants of the pilgrims, words of worship turned hoarse by devotion and despair. To them, the golden towers were proof that their god was awakening. But to Valerian, they were tombstones rising from the living flesh of a dying world. He descended again into the palace depths that night. He told no one, not even Orestes. Something within him compelled him back to the heart of it all, to the place where silence hummed with meaning. The corridors were alive now. The walls shifted faintly, their surfaces breathing in slow rhythm. His armor's sensors registered impossible readings, traced bioelectric currents running through the gold itself. He reached the edge of the throne's containment vault and stopped. The chamber was unguarded. The air shimmered with warmth. Where once the gold had been cold, now it radiated life, slow, patient, sentient. He could feel it even through the armor. He stepped closer. The throne loomed before him, no longer just a machine. Its surfaces moved with imperceptible motion, golden veins pulsing faintly, light crawling beneath them like blood beneath skin. The emperor's body remained still, but the cables that pierced his flesh no longer hung lifeless. They trembled gently, like strings of some divine instrument, vibrating to a song only the cosmos could hear. Valerian knelt. He had knelt here countless times before, but never like this. My lord, what are you becoming? The answer came not in words, but in vision. The chamber dissolved into light. He saw the galaxy aflame, worlds burning like candles before a storm. He saw the warp folding in on itself, screaming, collapsing into silence. He saw a sea of gold spreading across the void, washing over planets, consuming cities, turning all into stillness. Not destruction, assimilation. Then he saw himself, standing upon a world made entirely of gold, motionless, perfect, eternal. The vision shattered. He fell forward, gasping. The air was heavy with the scent of ozone and burnt metal. His gauntlet pressed against the floor, and when he lifted it, a faint layer of gold dust clung to the palm. He stared at it, trembling. The throne pulsed once. The voice that followed was neither loud nor soft. It simply was. I have endured your prayers, your offerings, your obedience. Now you will endure me. The sound tore through the chamber. The walls groaned, the conduits flared, and Valerian felt the psychic pressure force him to his knees. He could not move. He could barely breathe. But even as the weight crushed him, something within him, something older than duty, refused to yield.
He lifted his head. The Emperor's eyes were still closed, yet the room blazed with awareness. You are not hunger, Valerian whispered. You are change. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor's mouth moved. Only a fraction of an inch, only for a heartbeat. The golden dust on his gauntlet shimmered, then dissolved into light. He rose slowly, unsteady but alive. The silence that followed was deeper than any he had known. He turned to leave and paused. Upon the wall beside the throne, something new had appeared, a symbol, drawn not by hand, but by the golden dust that had clung to his armor. The Aquila, but not the Empress. Its wings curved upward, enclosing the world within their grasp. Beneath it, a single phrase burned faintly, inscribed by no tool of man: "The reign begins." Valerian stared at the words, their meaning settling into his bones like prophecy. He did not know if what stirred within the throne was salvation or damnation, but he understood at last why they were called custodians. They were not guardians of life. They were witnesses of ascension. He turned once more toward the throne and bowed deeply, not as soldier to master, but as mortal, to something beyond comprehension. "By your will," he whispered again, and somewhere deep within the machine, the throne answered with the faintest of sounds. A heartbeat. Slow, endless, eternal. The silent reign of gold had begun.